So welcome back for those of you who have watched the first two parts in this video submission for the Well Played Retrospective Journal. For those of you who are coming across this video through some other path, let's introduce ourselves. I am Moses Wolfenstein, sometimes games scholar and sometimes games designer, although my day job at the moment is faculty distance education coordinator at El Camino College.
And I am Mark Chen. I'm at the University of Washington Bothell as a faculty member teaching in the interactive media design program. But a long time ago, before grad school and all that stuff, I used to be a game designer for a science museum in Portland, Oregon.
I'm David Simpkins. I'm a associate professor at the Rochester Institute of Technology's School of Interactive Games and Media. I am most of my design has been in the kind of analog tabletop role-playing space, but I teach digital game design, analog game design, even a little programming, and all sorts of stuff over at RIT.
All right, and in the second part of this video series, David joined Mark and I for continued interrogation of Well Played and where Well Played as a journal and games research more broadly, in some respects, has come. And we realized while we were playing Pandemic that we were in fact playing a roguelike, and that roguelike and roguelite games have had a really big impact. No pun intended, as something seems to be striking David's craft here. On games, and that to some degree that actually is kind of really old. Everything old is new again. But that it was worth digging in a little bit as we talk about a couple more themes in terms of things that we think are important and essential in where the well-played discourse is at. And so here we are with FTL, Faster Than Light. I have not played FTL previously, so Mark or David, would either of you like to give a little context about the game?
Sure. I have this brilliant opportunity where I'm simply going to restart. Well, while I try and figure out how to balance out talking and communicating with my computer at the same time. FTL is a roguelike where you control this spaceship and you're trying to deliver a message to your battle fleet. If you get through many different sectors, this is one sector that we're seeing right now. If you get through many different sectors, you'll eventually get to the battle fleet and be able to deliver your message and find out that it's up to you to defend the battle fleet against the flagship craft, which is this big gigantic monstrosity of an enemy that you got to beat. So yeah, there's kind of a role-playing element where you go through and you try and survive all these encounters and decide if you're going to be a decent person or just finish your mission. We're going to see a lot of that.
Okay.
That's a spoiler, right? Like the fact that at the very end you fight this big huge ship, that's not known at the beginning, right?
Correct. Yep, definitely.
Spoiler alert, if you are watching this video, have not played FTL, and it's too late for that.
Are we not kind of tagging spoiler alerts to everything we do? I think we're going to spoil the heck out of this.
I believe that's actually generally a totally decent assumption in any well played. It is by definition going to be spoiler-ish, if not completely spoiler-prone.
But I'll also say the game is so iterative that anything you learn kind of on the big scale like that's a very mild spoiler, because if you get to the end, you definitely will get that information. You'll have that opportunity and that requirement. But there are so many things that can happen only once every 5 or 6 playthroughs, right? So like this thing that's happening now, we're encountering a slave ship, and we can buy the freedom of one of the slaves, or we can just attack the slavers. That happens a lot, but then some of the events are pretty rare, and you might not ever encounter it on a single playthrough.
Okay, having not played the game, I didn't realize it has ethical decisions in it. This is very cool.
Yeah, that's part of for me, that's part of why I kept playing, because I wanted to see all the different events and everything. And I found all of them written pretty well too. And so it's just really, for me, it was sort of like the insight, I guess, into the universe of FTL, like the different alien races and everything. A lot of that, I guess the lore is sort of embedded in these textual encounters that you have.
Gotcha. And what I'm seeing here, it's actually surprisingly click heavy in a sense. Like you're doing internal and external management like in real time. For some reason, I kind of had the notion that this game was perhaps more turn-based than it actually is.
Yeah, it's actually quite real time, other than when you're making a decision about where you're going to go next or something like that. Whenever you're in a combat, and the whole game is kind of geared toward making decisions to either get into or avoid a series of combats, ship combats. So right now I'm in kind of, for a moment, was in turn-based mode, and I can wait on this screen forever if I want. But the minute I make a decision, I may be in a fight.
And in this case, the decision is pretty pretty limited.
Right. Yeah, the pirate's attacking me, so I don't have a lot of choices.
Mm-hmm. But once you're in a fight, you can pause it.
True. Spacebar pauses, unless you kind of make planning, make tactical plans. But you can't do anything. So you can order somebody to do something.
Mm-hmm.
I just ordered my guy to go into the med bay, but you can't.
Okay.
You can't actually. They won't start. They'll move in real time.
Yeah.
Which is kind of normal for pause and what's the tag for that kind of pause and play.
Pause and play.
Yeah, I don't know.
Sure.
I think I just made that up.
You might have. It sounds familiar, but that doesn't mean anything.
Right. Exactly.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's common in a lot of games.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of turn-based, like a lot of games are. It's kind of turn-based in the sense that you can play it at your own speed, because you can pause so readily.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that you're you know, there's an aspect to it that's not turn-based, and it's all based on the timers, right? These timers clicking up. So time really is a huge factor of the gameplay, and getting your timing down is very important. Like, these guys are constantly healing their shields. I want to keep the shields down so I can damage the equipment. That's a matter of timing, trying to get my timing right, and dropping their shield before they get it done.
Right.
So it's just kind of a lot of things you have to manage, but if you ever get overwhelmed, you can pause it.
Mm-hmm. And you can do things like, so you can have them set to automatically fire if they're ready once the timer runs out. Or you can have it set so that you have to command them to fire, because sometimes you want like a missile to be launched right after their shield are down, and so you want to wait until your lasers are ready and to get the shields down before you fire the missile. Otherwise, your missile is going to be wasted, right?
Gotcha. So yeah, that is actually for me a novel spin on the cooldown game, so to speak, the cooldown mini game, which I think we're all extremely familiar with, and which probably many of the folks viewing this are going to have been familiar with from various eras of popular games in the last 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that's I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just thinking we need the mod to add a cooldown timer on these little button bars that you have set up, just like we do in World of Warcraft.
One of the things that's very common in roguelikes and in RPG kind of derivatives in general is this idea that, you have a mission. You want to go and do your mission. And to do that, you should definitely take a circuitous route. You should not take a straight line. You need to go visit all the corners of every place, because otherwise you'll miss a bunch of content. So it's just kind of funny that you have this really time-based mission, and you have this constant threat of this red bar growing. But in the meantime, it's really smart for me not to try and go to the exit. I want to explore as many places as possible before I actually leave this sector. It doesn't matter how close they are to me. Once I hit the exit, they'll always start at the beginning. So I'll always get the same amount of time in the next sector to explore. Which is it's kind of an interesting conceit that you're always encouraged to explore. But exploring is one of the big hallmarks of a well-played experience for a lot of players. Right?
It absolutely is. I'm feeling a really strong callback to the ludonarrative kind of structural modeling that Drew Davidson obviously originally posited in his Prince of Persia: Sands of Time here, right? Where there is like a little bit of a disjunction between this notion of like, oh, the urgency, the temporal urgency, which is so common, David, as you're pointing out, in a lot of games, versus, in a sense, the ludic urgency of exploration and maximizing the opportunities in any given part of the game or any given state, right?
Right.
Well, but in a lot of games, the exploration and the urgency of like the main mission seem kind of in tension with each other.
Yes.
Sometimes not really as like an integral part of the game system, but more like as a player, I just want to explore everything, Whereas in FTL, you kind of have to do that exploration because it's the only way that your ship is going to get enough upgrades so that you are powerful enough to face the very final encounter. Like so every additional node that you explore might give you additional rewards. So then when you go to a store, you can afford particular equipment or something that you feel like your ship really needs for the build to work out well. And so it's not just rewarding. I mean, it's not just rewarding you with like the sense of exploring new things, but it's also actually rewarding you in terms of like the game system itself. You have to level up, like essentially level up your ship in order to actually be able to beat the game at the very end. Like the very first time you meet that end game boss, if your ship isn't ready, like it's very, very sobering. Like it's very like you feel like you're doing fine, and then you meet that guy for the very first time, and you're just like, holy crap! It just like reached a whole nother level, right? And
no doubt, no doubt. Yeah, you're just blown away, right? It's amazing that you think you're doing okay, but you really aren't unless you have well outpaced the kind of curve up to that point, which is kind of a bad, you could say is a bad design in some ways, but I feel like the design of this game is so tight in so many different ways that I don't know. I don't mind that at all in this case.
So to invoke a conversation that Mark and I were having in the first portion of the first segment, video segment that we recorded, it's about the sort of tacit agreement or implicit agreement between the player and the game, right? And so I guess the question that comes to my mind is whether that breaks the agreement the first time you encounter it, or is it just a adjustment of your expectations for continuing to engage with this game on your next playthrough?
I feel like you've been promised that that's going to be a hard fight, and then it's a really hard fight.
Okay.
So it's not it doesn't break the agreement at all. It kind of pays it off, but it pays it off in a way that you might not expect, right? You might expect it to have cut you some slack, especially on easy. Right now we're playing on easy.
Sure.
I've beat the game on normal. I don't think I've ever beat the game on hard. There are people out there that have, but they are more more mighty than I. There's just so much skill actually involved in becoming an expert at this game that there's a really steep learning curve. They force you into that learning curve, even on easy at that end boss. And really, you'll probably die a lot of times before you even get to that end boss as you learn the basic mechanics of the game. There's some really easy mistakes to make. Like right now, I'm opening and closing doors, but if I open all of the doors, I'll open the outside doors out here, and evacuate oxygen for my whole ship, right? And those kind of things, you learn the hard way, and then you learn why you might want to do that at some point, right? To put out a fire,
sure,
or something like that, or to kill intruders. It's interesting, right? Constantly encouraging you to learn.
Yeah. So like in the first video where I was playing Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and we were talking about, I guess you have to place trust. You trust that the system makes sense internally, and then sometimes, I guess, well, if I remember right, we were talking specifically about like glitches and things like that, or like when the NPC animation just is kind of broken a little bit,
well, yeah, not necessarily glitches, even just places where the capabilities of the game can't meet your expectation for what's kind of been promised as far as it feeling natural or real, right?
Right. I think in FTL's case, it's a little bit different in the sense that I don't recall a time when it broke that trust, but it's more about you encounter something that you weren't expecting, and you just have to sort of reformulate the game system in your mind, and take this new information and incorporate it into your understanding of how the game works and everything. Whereas in Assassin's Creed or other where like the system isn't a good enough simulation, that's more about I mean, sure, you're taking that new information and incorporating it into your expectation of the system, I guess, but it wasn't deliberate. Like the developers didn't go like, oh, we're going to deliberately make this NPC seem kind of clunky,
Right.
Whereas in FTL, they totally deliberately made that fight kind of unfair, and you're incorporating that new information into your mind and everything for the next playthrough. And I guess, I mean, I wouldn't call Assassin's Creed a roguelike. And
Oh no, it's certainly not, right? It's an action RPG or
Mhm.
something to that effect, open world action RPG.
Yeah, so like in FTL, when you incorporate, like that's basically how roguelikes function, where like you're constantly incorporating new information so that the next time you play, you're a little bit smarter about what you do, and you can strategize a little bit better, and you get this sort of incremental improvement. With each playthrough, you learn a little bit more about how the actual game works and everything, and you fill in your little gaps of knowledge, I guess. But that system is still stable. It's just that you're learning more about the system, you know.
Absolutely. And so to put that back into the language of what it takes for the game to provide well-played experiences, what it takes even for roguelikes to provide well-played experiences, right? And within the framework that we're already talking about reflectively, about the agreement between player and game via system. It's like for designers, they have a completely different set of requirements to meet, and then for players, there's different things that you need to be willing to accept, right? Like there are different types of fidelity for players in terms of what really what comes down to player preferences, that are there as the floor for the experience to be potentially well played.
Sorry, I'm a little distracted. It's always gleeful to see a bunch of enemies running around on fire.
I had a feeling that you were seeing more than I was able to process in the process of that fight.
Yeah, it's the fights are kind of consuming. Actually, it's so easy to go from a fight that's totally under control to one that is slipping out of bounds, where you're starting to lose control, and that I don't know. That's, again, it's a part of the agreement of the game, but it can be a little hair raising, especially if you're not entirely paying attention. So I was
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's really interesting because it just makes me think it's not something we're doing in these videos, in retrospecting well played, but it's something that like I'm sure has come up before, of the taxonomies of gameplay experiences. I'm pretty sure I've been involved in some of those conversations.
Right.
Iteratively, something we'll come back to. But that teetering on the edge of control type of fun, so to speak,
Right.
it's definitely common across different genres, and it definitely has a significant kind of thrill to it.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I was just reflecting on, even in an FPS, how you can have that kind of moment. I'm currently playing Apex Legends, and it's a game where you get third party, and getting third partied or third partying, if you're the one tilting somebody else's moment, is exactly that. You're like, oh yeah, we've got this in control. Oh wait, no, new variables have entered the situation, and now it's spinning wildly out of control. And it's certainly something that can keep a game fresh.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Do you think this actually reminds me of something? I don't know, this is going to be a tangent probably, but in my book, where Elite Noobs, where I wrote about expertise in World of Warcraft, one of the things I said about experts was that they're constantly sort of pushing at the boundaries, and in the case of like an Olympic skier, always on the precipice of disaster. Like, you kind of have to push the limits of what you are capable of doing in order to be able to win a medal at an Olympic game. And if you're not doing that, then there's no chance that you're going to be winning. But if you are doing that, it means there's a high chance that you might wipe out and then just not complete the race at all, right?
Right.
And if you watch, like, I think when I was writing that book at the time, the Winter Olympics were on when I was writing that chapter, and I was watching so many of those skiing events where like these Olympic athletes who everyone agrees are like the best skiers in the world, right, were wiping out left and right. And it just sort of struck me as really remarkable how often they failed, actually, even though they were quote unquote the experts, right? And so I'm wondering if like these scenarios where you encounter where everything's going fine and then something happens, um, if that happens more often to experts than non-experts, because you actually are seeking those types of scenarios.
That is definitely, I mean, that seems likely to me. That, you know, it's that question of risk. It strikes me as touching on flow.
Yeah.
You know, that as your expertise increases, you need to push towards states that have an increasingly higher probability of failure in order to even maintain that level of engagement, which does kind of raise the topic of seeing the horizon in terms of a well-played experience, which is kind of one of the main themes that that I wanted us to touch on, is this idea that things that well-played experiences can become, or that a specific game is a you know, is a avenue, can become exhausted for an individual.
Right. One of the things I'm realizing, so it's been, I don't know, it's been a year since I played this at all regularly, and I'm realizing just how much of the flow of the game
Mhm.
I don't have under my belt, right? I don't. It's not natural right now, which means there's, you know, I'm learning again. I'm kind of relearning
Yeah,
this thing. So there definitely has been a horizon. You know, there's a reason I stopped playing at some point, and then there's a reason that I might come back to it and play it all over again because that horizon's been receded. I don't know, over time.
yeah.
It's an
I mean,
interesting.
undoubtedly not entirely reset, because clearly you're moving through with a great deal of facility here, at least to the untrained eye.
Right, right. No, and I think I cognitively know. I mean, there are things I've forgotten, but I've cognitively know most of the things that I need to be attending to, and that's so much of a well played game. Often is um, what do you notice? What do you bother to notice? And what do you just not notice? Right? What do you ignore because it takes up too much of your cognitive load?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Absolutely.
You
And some
develop
of that I've got.
professional
You know,
vision.
yeah. Some of that I've still retained. I imagine if it was a couple more years out, I wouldn't retain those. Um, but I I don't know. It still feels like I'm a little clunky, right? And it feels new in that way. It feels, because I'm a little clunky, it doesn't feel like it's frustrating to me right now. It feels sort of exciting, like I'm relearning something I had mastered, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of jumping ahead on this conversation because I think the first step is you hit a horizon where you kind of feel like you're doing the same thing over and over again, right? And then you have the opportunity to, I don't know, experience something like, you know, different things that are new and become increasingly mastered. And then you're kind of reach the end of that. You've leveled up as high as you think you're going to level for now, and you might want to walk away. You hit their horizon or see their horizon, and it's just a little less interesting than it was. Then that, you know, that happens on a regular basis. So, you know, when I hit that, I usually walk away for a while. Now, coming back to it, I could definitely play this for another 40 hours, 30 or 40 hours, I'm sure, and really enjoy it. If something else in my life doesn't get in the way, right? That horizon has receded enough that I have not just a little bit of gameplay in me, but probably quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Though I'm, you know, maybe I'm a little more compulsive than most.
You know, I would just theorize, although this is for a game psychologist to really deduce, that game players, the people who enjoy games in general, maybe, you know, fit a little bit of that model. So
Right,
you might
right.
not be so far to the edge there.
Yeah, yeah.
Which oddly enough has its um, own implications for considering the contract of the well played game, between player and game system. The A disposition for many types of games, or maybe especially for many types of video games, to engage in a form of more compulsive play, to you know, engage in those cycles rather than a desire or a greater drive to diversify experiences, I guess. Assuming those two things have at least some degree of tension between them.
Right. Okay, got it. yeah, I think there's something about a digital game that is unconstrained, right? There's a horizon of play built into most tabletop games, most like board games, because you have to have other people to play with, because you have to set up the board, right? It's not just there for you when you want to show it up, but mostly because of other people, right?
Yeah.
You have this kind of need to have it be a social event. The most computer games, either it's very easy to connect with other people. That there are a lot of things that organizations that have organized around computer game playing, which make it easier to group up and play in an MMO or something like that. Or you can play, it's a single player game and you can play it anytime you want. And that opens the possibility of playing as much as you feel comfortable playing, or beyond that, as much as you can play, which is interesting, right? It's a different thing that our societies haven't faced. I don't know, they faced it in a different way, right? When there's always a party around every corner, then somebody may find themselves always going to a party. But if there's,
especially if you live in Miami.
Yeah. But if there's just a natural limit to what you can do, then those limits have some limiting factor on everything about your play. And I'm not saying that, I don't want to play into the addiction kind of discussion too heavily. I think we overstate that sometimes. I mean, people overstate that sometimes around games. But definitely there's an aspect to, as a teacher of games, right? I have students who are particularly interested in playing games, and sometimes they play games too much, right? And they don't get their work done. It's certainly a phenomenon that happens, and part of the reason it can happen is that there's no limit to it, if that makes sense.
Definitely.
Uh-oh.
And this is one of those tricks that you learn when you master this game. Fight in the med bay. You heal, they don't. So I was really getting my ass kicked here, and then suddenly it all turned around because they decided to fight me in the med bay.
Yeah, totally did.
And it works out.
Yeah, which I was planning for, but you have to let your ship get blown up a little bit. Yeah. In the meantime, every time a system gets destroyed, I lose a little bit of health on the hull, so it's not great.
And is that reclaimable?
By going to a store and having it fixed, or by having some special abilities that I don't have.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So the 55, the number 55 at the top there. That's basically like the in-game currency that you can use for a bunch of different things. Like you can use it to buy fuel, you can use it to repair your ship, you can use it to buy components, and part of the balance is weighing how much you should spend on repairs and fuel versus how much you should spend on new components that will basically just make your ship be able to do things that the default isn't able to do. So like sometimes you can build your ship towards certain types of strategies. Like you can really emphasize having a really strong boarding party, for example, where you teleport your guys over to the enemy ship, and the different components that you have on your ship are going to be different than if you specialize in just blowing their ship apart, right?
Right.
So you would invest in different types of components and everything.
Which I mean, also surfaces another element in terms of games with breadth, different avenues for different players to have a well-played experience, or different layers that a player can dive into. You might be seeing the horizon with the style or tactic that you've been or strategy that you've been approaching with. You can go like, well, okay, but the designers have given me another avenue here, and maybe I didn't find it initially interesting, or maybe I just didn't have enough mastery of the basics to go there.
Yeah, or maybe, I mean, I guess one question I have is, there are certain ships lend themselves to certain strategies more than others, and does a single player need to sort of master all these different types of ways of approaching the fights in order to, like, I guess, get the most enjoyment out of like all the ships and everything? Or can someone just be like, I just want to shoot things and just play the game that way and ignore like Or would they be able to use like a ship that's built on something else completely, like stealth or whatever, and be like use the same strategy, just blow everyone up? Like, would that even work? I don't know if that would work.
I think there's a limit to how much it works, but there's definitely an advantage to learning a strategy and becoming expert at it, right? But you can't rely on that strategy for everything. There's a point at which you've got to expand beyond your intro strategies, and I think that's one of the things that we were talking about the boss fight at the end. That's one of the things that it really makes you do. It's a several stage fight. And at each stage, you have to utilize a different kind of strategy in order to win.
Mm-hmm.
At least you probably have to. So I think the whole game is letting you play around and become good at one thing, and then mixing it up just in time, right? Coming in and mixing it up and making you learn how to do something else.
Mm-hmm. If I remember right, the last fight actually really punishes you if you're only good at one thing.
Yeah, it has special rules that it uses that really, for each segment of the fight, you're going to have to do you're going to have to deal with a novel situation, and there are a lot of little novel situations that come up on these little, like, not every fight is the same. Even during the normal gameplay, you can't use the same tactic every single time. Sometimes you're in an asteroid field, you saw that, and your shields are being dropped all the time. You've got to take account of that. But in that boss fight at the end, things are radically different for the 3 stages of the fight, so you really have to be prepared for that. It also kind of means the first time you fight the boss, you're not prepared for that, and you will die.
Almost definitely. Sure.
Yeah, there's an iterative nature to this that means that the first time through is really just not fair.
Well, the second time also, because because you may die just in the first stage of the boss fight, not realizing there are multiple stages.
That's right. There's so many ways to die.
I mean, this is a video game phenomenon, to be sure. And incidentally, if I'm not mistaken, one that the Well Played Journal has tapped into previously and kind of explored to a certain extent, failure at least, in games.
Right. There's this really nasty aspect of this game where they'll surrender. They'll offer to surrender sometimes, and I feel like there's a kind of a decision you make about, once you get kind of comfortable with the game, you can certainly play it in some kind of moral way where you always accept a surrender, and that won't be terrible. But if you're min-maxing the game at all, if you're kind of evaluating the game, you probably are looking at it and saying, well, is that offer to surrender really good, right? Am I going to get more out of the surrender than I would from just blowing the ship up? And that's a sort of grim calculation to make, that the game is having you make. Talking about the kind of the moral dilemmas built into this game. They're really all over the place.
Yeah. Well, and it's not like it's all about you yourself playing a particular moral path, I guess, because it's not like the ending changes based off of your moral decisions or anything like that.
Right, but you may get to an ending because you
right.
played the moral game well, right?
But it's not like Mass Effect, where different story branches are going to be presented to you because you made certain choices earlier in the game and everything.
Right.
Different narrative story, I guess, choices or whatever, or branches or whatever.
Right.
No, more along the lines of played narrative, right, as opposed to the written narrative.
Yeah, right. I mean, I guess there are things where you can rescue. I think you can rescue certain NPCs and then return them to like their homeworld or something like that. Is that am I remembering that right?
Yeah, there are some quests where you have one of them is rescuing a NPC and returning them to their homeworld. Another one is leading a ship to its homeworld. Right, a ship has lost its navigation, so it's tagging off of your navigation to get home. Things like that, right? You have kind of multi-stage quests sometimes.
But usually those aren't. I mean, to speak to what you were just saying, I'm not sure those are actually moral choices. Usually, because usually, like, well, you're going to get some sort of reward out of this, so you should do it.
Yeah, until you agree to do it, and then they backstab you.
Oh, I didn't know that was.
Yep. They lead you into a trap, or they get on board your ship and they attack you, or any of the lovely things they might do.
Of course, you're usually inevitable betrayal.
Yeah. But usually don't, right? So there's this this kind of, if you're just callous to it all and just don't help anybody, then you miss a lot of opportunities. But if you think everyone's going to be nice, you you get screwed. You don't do so well. So you kind of have to decide: can I take, if they attack me now? Am I in a position where I can fight them off? And if so, maybe it's worth taking the risk. If not, maybe it's not worth taking the risk, right? It's kind of a interesting. I don't know. They're moral choices with some practical concerns built in. Yeah,
but you kind of have to. So it's been a while since I played, and I haven't played as much as you, but I kind of feel like you have to be willing to take at least some of those risks, because again, it's the only way that your ship is going to be strong enough for the last fight.
Right. You're better off taking some risks, I think. In fact, I think if you're playing the game well, I mean, it's not well played, but if you're playing the game skillfully, you'll generally be in a position where you can afford the risk, so you should take it. Right. You won't be destroyed by losing, and you're more likely to gain more than you'll lose. So, kind of even from a practical standpoint, you should take the risk. But if you're struggling at all, it can go downhill fast.
Right.
All right, we're getting a teleporter, and we're getting into a whole new game now. Boarding parties.
I was about to say maybe we should switch to Loop Hero soon, but
we should.
Now we want to see boarding parties.
We do want to see boarding parties, and we'll have to pick up Loop Hero in a part 2, because I think it'll be essential to also do a little debrief, so to speak, to raise up the themes just a little bit more. But we definitely need to see some boarding parties.
Okay, so we're gonna get to a boarding party action here. Let's kind of push it here. I'm definitely attacking the Slaver Scum.
There we go.
Boarding parties. We want boarding parties. All right. Before I send over the boarding party, I don't really want them destroying my ship while I'm out. So I'm gonna see if I can take out their guns first.
Not if your guns are taken out.
Yeah, you got something on fire.
Oh man. Okay, I promised. I promised showing why you would open yourself up to fire. So here it is. Let's just do it, right? The worst thing that's going to happen here is that I'll lose. So, maybe I'll die, but
they have rock.
I'll die in a good cause.
Just don't space your dudes.
Wow, you're doing so much more damage than they are.
Yeah, they're NG. They're not good at that.
Oh, NG.
Yeah, they are. They're not good at this. Oh. I've got a rip in my hull. This is not good.
That's not good.
Yeah. You better fix that teleporter, or otherwise you won't get your guys back.
Yeah. They're taking damage here. Okay, time to run. Everybody runs to the mid bay. Go fix that. I'm gonna die anyway, but it's been fun. Can't hit anything right now.
Wow. Like cascading failures going on right now.
Yeah.
Would you say you overextended by getting the teleporter?
No, I did not overextend by getting the teleporter. I did overextend by sending the party over there, and that was kind of intentional. Right? I mean, we wanted to see a boarding party in action, and I gave you a boarding party in action, but it was not the right time to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
But I got control of it, Yeah.
Hey,
I'm just taking their surrender and calling this a day, because that did not go so well.
But you won.
You did win.
I won.
You live to fight another day.
I was at like
got a new
full
crew
health.
Member.
Yep, I was at like full health, and now I'm at half health. It was really not a good fight, but in the end of the day, if you can walk away, at least you have a time to rebuild. And that crew member is a very useful addition to my boarding party, because they take a ton of damage. So now I've got a dedicated boarder.
Oh, nice. Okay, see, that works
and
out.
that seems like a perfectly good time to move on, right? If we want to debrief this a little bit.
Yeah, let's
Or do you want
debrief this a little bit, and then we will. This will be a video in 2 parts, seeing as we have a different set of themes to address. And I'm going to show a little loop hero to set the table for that part. But let's talk a little bit about a little bit more about Horizons in the broader context, which is to say, reflecting on well played.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Mark, I think one thing that you and I got to fairly early on as we were thinking about the bigger picture of what it means to be retrospecting well played is a degree of parallels or ways in which playing games, engaging with games, and engaging with games research can parallel or reflect on each other. And so one of the reasons why this idea of the horizon came up is you posed a question. I don't think in the first video. I'd have to go back and read our closed caption transcript. But I think as we were preparing to do that video about the need for the well-played journal in terms of where games research is at the moment, or how far it's come, whether it is still needed or whether the need for it has changed. And that's kind of the question here in considering this concept of horizons. Is there a horizon to well-played based off of kind of the state of games and play and games research?
Well, I guess the thought that I had, so there's 2 thoughts going on in my head right now, but one of them is just that I feel like I myself am getting older, and as I'm getting older, or as I've sort of been engaged in like reading game scholarship, for a while now, it feels like new people come in to the fold, and there's a lot of rehashing of things that we were thinking about 10 years ago.
Sure.
Or we were thinking about 5 years ago, and then 5 years ago before that. Like it's with every new crop of grad students, it seems like they're like, well, so in my experience, one of the first things you do as a grad student is, let's come up with a taxonomy of games. It's like every single grad student does that, right? And it doesn't actually get very far. Like they get to a point, maybe there's a journal article out of it, but I feel like that let's define different game genres isn't like a set in stone thing, and it's basically rehashed over and over and over and over and over again. Like it's this thing that's never going to be resolved.
Right.
And I feel like a lot of what we do in education feels similar to me. I mean, I've seen grants to NSF or to like MacArthur or Gates Foundation or whatever that are basically proposing the same things that we were proposing 5 or 10 years ago. And it's like these things are basically just, we're on this infinite loop. It's like we're in a Groundhog's Day sort of situation, or like every day is the same day, every day is the same dream, or what was that game called? Where like, I don't know. And it struck me as when we were playing Valhalla that games are similar. Like I basically played the same game 10 years ago. It's just the graphics are better, and so like I feel like, and maybe it's because of my age, I feel like I'm in this infinite loop now where I'm not sure that much is progressing. But at the same time, it's also exploded. And so that's where the weird thing is, right? So like now we have YouTube, and now we have, we have all these online journals, First Person Scholar, for example, as one of them. And there's so many different ways for people, even so, and not necessarily even academics, to write really intelligently or talk really intelligently about games. Where 10 years ago, I feel like the Well Played Journal was like one of the only places, you know what I mean? And so we have sort of like this explosion of venues, but I'm not sure if the ideas are different. You know what I mean? I don't know. And I don't have any basis on this other than it's not like I've done a literature review or anything like that, so I don't know.
But I think you're commenting on something that occurs in all media to some degree. And is part of a bigger question about progress in general, right? And this idea of positivist progress, right? Are we answering all the questions in the world, right? Well, just wait long enough, and clearly we'll answer all the questions in the world. It's a very positivist worldview, and I'm not putting that on you, but I think there's a sense in which part of us are like a part of our thought pattern about as academics is what questions are out there that are interesting to answer right now. And then you look around and you see 5 years later, 10 years later, other people are coming along and asking the same questions you thought were interesting 10 years ago. They're not necessarily reading you because there's a lot out there. They're kind of answering these questions themselves. And especially for the grad students, they're making a taxonomy of games. Why? Well, they think it's because they're saying something really interesting about games. The truth is they're learning something really interesting about their own conceptualization of games. It's a process they need to go through, I think, in order to develop a higher order level of thinking about games, and almost go with Wittgenstein's, the rhubarb argument, right? Wash it out of your system. You make a taxonomy of games in order to realize that a taxonomy of games is problematic. It's a flawed concept from the very beginning. Useful, but flawed, right? It can tell you something about games and how they fit together, and then it'll miss a bunch of stuff that's really interesting. And what it misses ends up being as interesting as what it says. And if you start noticing the cracks, if you become skilled at noticing the cracks, then you start noticing how to extend the conversations into a deeper level. And that's I think where this gets into kind of general media theory, that I'm going to make a far too blanket, far too broad statement about, right? When you start off in a new media, everything's new, and you're trying to recreate an experience in another media, right? You're trying to recreate games, initial games where we're trying to Pong, right? We're trying to recreate the experience of a game on a schoolyard or something like that, kind of, or tennis, right? But they also pretty quickly start to realize that if it's really a new media, there are affordances in this media that aren't elsewhere. And you start digging into those affordances and making games that eventually work toward the game that really could only be made in that media, or the experience that could only be had in that media. Right, whether it's movies or television, right? How are movies different than television? It's bigger. It's a lot bigger, right? And you have all this constrained space, and then when you move television into the home studio space with these large screen TVs and these enclosed spaces, they look a little bit more like movies. But still, there's something else that differentiates the media. When we start to create for media, I think we start to create from what we're familiar with, and very quickly, hopefully, move on to what the media itself is doing. And that's quick and that's interesting. But then we move past that, and we start to think about and talk about what we're creating and what we could create. We enter a conversation, and that conversation becomes a part of the media, right? And then eventually, and that's interesting. But then eventually, we're in the moment where we're talking about the conversation. We're having a conversation about the conversation about media. And we produce things in that media that are part of the conversation about the media, right? They're second order, third order media experiences. And those are really cool when you're in the conversation, right? But you constantly have people that are moving into the familiarity with the media, either because they just haven't thought about it before, or because they haven't really had access to it, or whatever. So, or they're new, right? They're young. They're constantly moving in, and they're going through the life stages of that media. At first, they're experiencing it like it's something new, or like it's like whatever they are used to. But pretty quickly, hopefully, they experience something new in it. They get excited about that, and then they enter the conversation, and then they enter the conversation about the conversation if they get so far, if they want to, right? So that conversation about the conversation never ends, because it's totally recursive, right? It's totally always the place where it can enhance itself by noticing what's left out of everything we said before. This goes back to what I was saying before, right? You start to hone that ability to notice what's being left out of the schemata that you created before, the schemas that you created before. What's in the cracks? Let's talk about the cracks, right? Let's target the cracks and let's bring those to light. All right, well, now there are new cracks. Let's target those cracks and bring those to light. You have this kind of constant cycle. And all of that, like a well-played game is not a well-played game. Like a well-played game may be good for somebody in one or two of those places in a kind of media, in the maturity of media experience, for lack of better words. But that isn't a well-played game. Well-played games live everywhere along that, everywhere on that spectrum. You have Stanley Parable, which is a great experience that's totally a conversation about the conversation about games, how games should be. And yet you have FTL, which is a conversation in the conversation about what games are, but I wouldn't say is the game itself is a conversation about the conversation of what games are, right? That's what we're doing now. We're having that conversation about the conversation about FTL, right?
Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I feel like this is the part where I put the video filter on, where we're just sort of like the infinite mirrors,
Right, right.
Video filter.
Right. And you know, this is not, I'm not going to make myself popular, but Derrida, it's always popular. You know, you always make yourself popular by talking about Derrida. Right now everyone should leave the party. Derrida and deconstructionism, you know, I thought it was just pointless until I kind of began to see it as the conversation about the conversation, and how and talking about how that's an important part about being in a space. So our deconstruction of games includes things like identifying gender and gender roles in games, and we need to do that, right? How is gender represented in games? How is gender represented in FTL? Is the fact that there are no male and female characters in FTL, is that interesting? And yeah, it's interesting, right? It takes off the board a whole bunch of things that are problematic. Also, gender's elided, right? It's left out, and that's problematic in some ways, right? That doesn't make the game good or bad, but you could definitely have an interesting conversation about using the game specifically about gender, right? Without gender being what the game's about at all, because it's a part of the conversation of the conversation. And that's kind of this part of this deconstructing paradigm. That's a tangential part of it. And then there are obviously really seriously problematic spaces where we need to deconstruct gender because what it's doing is really harmful. And we're just kind of accepting it because it's part of the game space. But our game space now, we've got to accept we're all old, right? The three of us, we're old. We grew up with games being not acceptable, right? So we had to fight for our space in the first place.
Absolutely.
Games have made it, right? Games have made it that we don't have to fight for their acceptability in culture anymore. Not the same way anyway.
Not broadly and not in the same way.
Right.
Oddly enough, in the podcast I do with my friend Paul Burbridge, we just on our episode 8, this came up, and I realized again, like, oh right, I am in a bubble, and the level of acceptability of games is so broad compared to what it used to be, and yet, depending when you get outside of that bubble, there is still a few of it. Many people will still regard games as for children or a waste of time or whatnot, right?
Right.
Which it seriously is mentally troubling given the level of adoption of games as as a hobby and form of play and across ages. Including the fact that like the most rapidly growing demographic of game players is like 50 plus or something like that. So, which again, for our age, broadly speaking, is the leading end of Gen X. So was it really surprising that the generation that got the Atari is still playing games or even potentially coming back to them as they're aging?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think Mark, you mentioned, I'm playing the same, you were playing the same game, a game like the game you played 10 years ago, but with better graphics. I found sometimes that I'm going back to games I played 10 or now 20 years ago and having a really good time with some of them and having not being able to get into others, right? Some of them age well and some of them do not. And it's not, it's funny how that happens, right? And what's interesting is my students also will get into games my students are all like 20 years old, right?
Right.
And they'll get into games that are 10 or 20 years old. And sometimes they'll get into them. We're getting to this place where the game doesn't have to be new anymore. The conversation maintains for longer than it used to, right? It used to be only a few years.
And I guess on sort of like a philosophical level, it doesn't matter if these conversations are looking unique to me or are novel to me. What matters is that they're novel to the people having them, right? And that's basically the same thing that I think about in terms of games. So I think a game really only is a game experience when it's instantiated, when somebody is actually playing it, right? Like my definition of games these days, or I tend to not define games. Instead, I tend to define gaming. And that requires somebody or something instantiating the event or the narrative of the playing, right? And that in itself has value because the parties involved are making meaning out of it, and and again, and totally with you, it's infinite, right? The meaning that we can make as humans is infinite. And so, I mean, maybe I just need to be a little bit more allowing that other scholars out there are also making these infinite conversations without me, but they're still, what they're doing is totally valid. And I'm just not part of it anymore, and that's okay, because I don't have to be a part of every game. I don't have to be a part of every conversation, right?
And so to functionally answer my question, the Well-Played Journal certainly is not reaching its horizon. If anything, unlike the way that I used the term horizon with regards to a play experience, which there is no, you cannot in fact reach the horizon, right? So with a game, I use the phrase like seeing the horizon as if it is something that can be arrived at, and as we've discussed, it can be, even if you can draw back and allow it to recede. In terms of the moment, as far as this journal goes, the horizon continues to recede. Every step forward that we make in game analysis as individual or within portions of a community, between relationally between scholars, but each scholar in their own right is making their own journey, and the horizon continues to recede before them. And personally, I feel like even just in these conversations thus far, the concept of well played has been revivified for me, and that each of the three of us looks at it a little differently than we did 10 years ago or more, when I mean, the journal is 11 years old now technically, right? As pandemics screw with time, and we are going on speaking of time, so 2006, 15 years since Drew did his Well Played Prince of Persia talk at GLS 3.0. So where that that notion first hit my brain pan, and I went, oh wow, okay, this is a totally different way to look at games. But for some folks out there, they're going to be hitting that for the first time, and so there's a trove of stuff to look backwards, in addition to their own unique advantages looking forwards, even if it is retreading from our perspective well-trod territory. And I've been rambling a little bit, but I will add that isn't that kind of fundamental in terms of games coming to a true level of maturity as a medium? And David, in terms of you saying that they've arrived, well, I mean, people still continue to critique fiction as a form of entertainment in books.
Yeah.
Like,
the arrival. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah.
No, that's perfect.
The arrival. I mean, the arrival is only that some people are having the conversation about the conversation. Not that everybody is, right?
Yeah.
No media is at the point where everybody's having the conversation about the conversation, and thank God, right? I mean, that can be tedious. Some people should be bringing in new life and energy into it, where they're seeing things with fresh eyes for the first time. They're excited about taxonomies of games. They're excited about, right? They're excited about games for what they are. Like looking at this game without having a conversation about 100 different games in the back of their head while they're talking about it. They're looking at this game that had a meaningful experience for them, that was well played, and they're explaining deeply why it's well played, right? I think there's always a place for that. And I think that's a fundamental question that this journal is going to have to tackle. How do we make space for that, and make space for the deep critique that has 100 years of gaming in the background, well before digital, right? Or well played 80 that is talking about 100 years of digital gaming, right? 80th year, if it goes that far up, right? But how do you look at this long trajectory back into the past of games and talk about it, and at the same time allow for a fresh eyes, right, that are coming to it for the first time? Can you? Should you? Right? Is that one journal? Is it two? Is it 12 with different stages in mind, right? And you can try and do too many things in one journal. You can also fragment the conversation so much that people aren't even in the same conversation anymore. Not even close. They're not even tangential to the same conversation anymore. You're just having billions of conversations in different spaces that don't talk to each other. And that's sad too. That's kind of sad to me if that were to happen. So I want to find some kind of middle ground.
Well, I mean, it happens in academia. It just happens. Right? I mean,
right.
10, 15 years ago when we were scholars, like there are a bunch of people who I didn't read or encounter their work, and would have been really, really useful had I done so.
Right.
And I think that's just I don't know. There's a lot of humans in the world.
There's too much. I mean, it's impossible to read it all. It's impossible to read. I mean, I would say, if I were trying to recreate myself, I'd say, well, you should probably get a philosophy degree and critical theory background first, and then you can go into games. And obviously that's ridiculous, right? That's a way to get there.
Mm-hmm.
It's my way of getting there. It's not the way to get there. But it means that people are going to have very different backgrounds in the first place walking in. And then their field is going to string them out in whole different directions, right? I mean, my students are game developers and game designers. They're not necessarily game theorists. They don't necessarily care, but they may really be up on engine as service, how to turn Unity and Unreal into a finely honed machine that will do exactly what you want it to, which is a conversation worth having in and of itself, right? Or how you make games on Unreal that really don't look Unreal like games that are made in Unreal, right? There's kind of pattern for Unity Unreal or something like that you want to break because you want your game to look unique. How do you do that, right? These are conversations worth having too. And they're about games. And they're not necessarily about the kind of themes that we tend to talk about in Well Played, but they belong in the greater discourse about academic game talk, right?
Absolutely.
So we can keep stacking things on top of each other, but we can also blow the sides open in all directions. If I can extend a metaphor maybe too far.
Well, and this is the point where we are going to need to step away from this conversation temporarily. But I think we'll have a short addendum, and likely it'll honestly make sense for viewability purposes to cut it into, maybe even to cut this into 2 separate videos and have our short addendum be a third, and we make a few edits into the textual companion to this, because I think that's a really solid wrap in terms of this component of things. Obviously we will all die, and other game scholars will arise to take up the mantle, and they might find Rogue Legacy like little bits of scholarship that we have left behind, and many of them they won't encounter because the procedural generator for scholarly items that they run into on their particular run just won't serve them a Simpkins or a General Wolfenstein. Yeah, so it happens,
Right.
And we too will pass on to history.
Yeah.
And quite unfortunately,
although maybe not. I'm hoping for the singularity and for us to live forever.
I'm increasingly okay with dying.
I'm you know what, I'm actually kind of with you, David, but that's another story. I was going to say, I'm just hoping that nobody actually has the idea to make a games researcher roguelike game, because God, nobody needs to play that.